Greetings and welcome to the United States Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon. My name is Gennady Stoliarov II, and I am the chairman of the U.S. Transhumanist Party. Here we hold conversations with some of the world's leading thinkers in longevity, science, technology, philosophy, and politics. Like the philosophers of the Age of Enlightenment, we aim to connect every field of human endeavor and arrive at new insights to achieve longer lives, greater rationality, and the progress of our civilization. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our virtual Enlightenment Salon of June 26th, 2022. I am pleased to welcome you to this special conversation on cryonics and an enterprising new startup that proposes to offer cryopreservation services for pets. And also we hope to delve into some related topics such as the prospects for cryonics more generally and the directions in longevity research that may be more fruitful over the coming decades. So first, I would like to introduce our esteemed panel for today. We have our Director of Visual Art, Art Ramon Garcia. We have our Director of Marketing and 2020 US presidential candidate, Charlie Kam. We have our Director of Applied Innovation, David Shoemaker. We have our Director of Longevity Outreach, Ben Ballweg. We have our Legislative Director, Jason Geringer. We have our Technology Advisor and Foreign Ambassador in Spain, Dr. Jose Cordero. And our special guest today is a serial entrepreneur, an angel investor, and founder and CEO of Cryopets, Kai Micah Mills. And Kai has actually had a history founding many startups over the past several years. He has made quite a journey. So we're pleased to have him here to share his thoughts. Welcome, Kai. Please tell us more about yourself and how you got interested in cryonics and what Cryopets is all about.
Yes, well, thank you so much for having me. First of all, it's good to see all of you. Of course, I've met David previously at the Alcord event, but and Jose and I have talked here and there about some pet cryopreservation stuff. But the rest of you, it's really great to meet you, and looking forward to chatting over these next couple hours. So I guess I can start with what really got me interested in life extension in general back in the day, and that was actually the 2045 initiative. So I'm sure all of you are familiar with it here. I think they started that around 2011. It was Dmitry Itskov's project, among a few others. And, this was around the same time that I was kind of pulling away from religion. And, as I'm sure you're aware, religion promises you that we're basically going to have this eternal life and everything is going to be okay. And there's this life after death, which was a very, very good feeling to have, right? You don't want to feel like there's nothing after all this. And as I started losing that, and I found that the 2045 initiative at the same time, which for anyone who's not aware was it was this project to basically make humanity immortal by 2045. The prospect of us doing this through science instead of through faith was very, very attractive to me at that time. So it sort of, started consuming all of my time, my energy. I basically started spending all my time researching into life extension, longevity, everything from the aging space with aging drugs and the work that Aubrey de Grey was doing at the time back in those days, and then everything from that to cryonics to mind uploading, right? Just the whole kind of field was very, very interesting to me, and it started taking so much of my headspace that I actually ended up dropping out of high school because I knew I wanted to focus basically full time and all of my efforts and energy on helping move this forward. And so I think I was 12 or 13 at the time, and I was entering my first year of high school. I think I went to 2 or 3 weeks of high school and ended up dropping out. And I didn't know exactly what I wanted to work on in this space. I knew that it was crucial for me to start a project, but part of the problem was, okay, I was 13 years old. I have absolutely no money, and the barriers to entry for projects like this are very, very high, right? If you want to start something in biotech, if you want to start something in deep tech, these are things that require a lot of money, right? So I kind of just did what I was good at, which was naturally computers and tech. If you're a 13-year-old with a laptop, I mean, you can change the world, right? Like you can do incredible things just from home. And I had a background in gaming, so that I kind of put my tech skills and gaming together, and I started developing. And I actually started out with the game Minecraft. So Minecraft at the time was a gold mine. I mean, it still is, right? Like the thing about Minecraft is you can program whatever you want into the game, right? So I learned how to code, self-taught, and started sort of putting these exciting mini games inside of Minecraft, and ended up making a little business out of it. And within a few months of me starting that, I was making more money than my parents combined, right? Just sitting at home playing games, essentially. And that's really what started my journey on entrepreneurship, is that especially internet entrepreneurship. Whenever you make that first dollar online, especially off of something like a game where you're just sort of having fun, is incredible, right? And I definitely got pretty addicted to it. So I went from running Minecraft servers to actually hosting Minecraft servers. So we built a company called MyMC Servers, and this was sort of my first real company with customers all over the world, and we were working with data centers. And that was actually the first company that I ended up selling. So I believe I was 15 when we ended up selling that company. And it wasn't some massive multi-million-dollar sale, but for a very young teenager at the time, it was a big deal. And it allowed me to focus my efforts on the next big thing, and sort of keep trying to get further and further in entrepreneurship, and eventually get powerful enough to take on something bigger in the life extension space. So after that, I ended up getting a little higher up in the hosting field. I started doing hosting dedicated servers, website servers. This was, of course, before AWS took everything over, right? So like these were the days where you would go to HostGator for a website, and you wouldn't be throwing things up on like an AWS bucket. Like it wasn't the time for that. So we had one of these fairly big cloud computing companies, and that was actually the second company that I sold. I believe I was 17 at that time. So I had a couple exits behind me. I had a lot of experience with running companies, having employees, customers, customer support. At this point, I was fluent in quite a few coding languages. Just sort of just did a lot in tech. And there were plenty of companies trickled in between, and some after that. I had one of the larger React web development companies on Upwork. I did a little bit in Web3, ended up making sort of a website builder for Web3 where it deployed onto a decentralized network. And then my most recent company, which is called Branch, which has raised a little over 14 million altogether, it started out as sort of a remote work app, but then ended up pivoting into a game studio. So I've been all over in tech, right? And it was after this last company that I was in that position that I really wanted to be in for the last 10 years, which was just having those resources, those connections, and just the experience as well, the ability to take on something that's larger. So it was actually around this time last year, maybe a little earlier, around May, I think last year, I decided that it was definitely time to jump in and start making an impact in life extension. And I actually considered doing something in the aging space originally. And just because the aging space is getting a lot of attention these days now, finally, right? I would say even just in the past year and 2 years, especially, it's gotten to the point where you can actually start something in that space and really kind of get funding for it. You have to be a little crafty and maybe call it like a cancer drug or a diabetes drug and try to still target it, but it's doable, right? So I started out in that space, and I think unfortunately, after talking to all the experts in the field, people who have been working in life extension for decades and decades, as well as just my own research and reading all the papers and seeing where everything was. I mean, compared to 10 years ago, there wasn't an overwhelming amount of progress that was made. A big part of that problem is just the overwhelming amount of unknown unknowns that are still in the longevity field, right? We can't even get a definition of aging that practically anyone can agree on at this point, right? So it's a difficult spot to be in, and I think my personal hope for longevity escape velocity in our lifetimes was, it sort of put a damper on that. And I think there's a lot of really excellent people in that field working on a lot of important projects. I don't even think that's really the problem. We have money. We have massive projects as well. Of course, we had Calico. Now we have Altos. I don't think it's necessarily a problem of like we just have a bunch of idiots in the field that can't figure anything out, right? That's not the problem. The problem is that there's so much red tape that we have to get through when it comes to when we're working with humans and when it comes to targeting the aging process. I mean, you can't get a drug through the FDA that's specifically targeting aging yet. You have to go through clinical trials, of course. These are things that just take a lot of time. And I didn't see it as very smart to target that when we could target the cryonics problem instead. So I think that's when I really started looking into cryonics more. Of course, I talked to Aubrey de Grey. I was talking to Greg Fahey, Tanya Jones, a lot of people that I really respect who are at least adjacent or directly involved in cryopreservation. And over time, it made a lot of sense that cryonics was the most important thing that we can focus on for a couple reasons. I would say the first reason is that it directly targets the death problem, which is very important to me. Even if we completely reverse the aging process in our lifetimes, which to this point is not very probable, I would say, there's still so many different causes of death that can still take you out, right? And if you live an extended lifespan or a radically extended lifespan, those probabilities are going to catch up to you, right? So that's kind of part of the problem with calling cryonics a plan B is you're essentially, if you call it a plan B, you're basically saying that if plan A works, we won't need plan B, right? And it's just not the case, because even if plan A works, which would be reversing the aging process, as most people would say, you're still going to have to go into cryostasis at some point in your radically extended lifespan until we completely transcend biology, right? There are always going to be things that can kill you, whether it's environmental, accidental, you can get murdered by some random guy in the street. Like, these probabilities are just very real, right? So it makes a lot of sense to target cryonics, not only because it directly targets the death problem, but also because there isn't all of that red tape that we see in the longevity space. By longevity, I mean the aging sort of focus. There are no clinical trials in cryonics, right? There's none of this, basically these hoops, these governmental hoops that we have to jump through in that space. So it's almost like we have this engineering problem. We know pretty well what's still causing a lot of the problems when it comes to the science. And the more money you throw at it, the faster it's going to get done, right? Because these are just problems that we have to solve, and they're laid out right there on the table. So that's basically what drew me into the cryopreservation field specifically. And then from there, it's like, okay, how do we move forward? If I dive in, I do the exact same thing that Alcor has been trying to do for 50 years, then we're going to be in the same spot in 50 years. I mean, I could speak for like 3 hours on what Alcor is doing wrong, right? Because it's a pretty big list. But I think there's a few key things that we can try to make happen here. No one should be performing these procedures if they're not a doctor. I think it's pretty ridiculous that people who are not doctors are performing these procedures, just because the legitimacy is greatly impacted, and also just, I mean, the outcome at the end of it. Really, we don't have a fantastic way to measure, or at least at these organizations, they haven't been measuring how well these preservations are actually going, how well these suspensions are being done. But if they did, they probably wouldn't be fantastic results. I mean, even if you read the case studies, right? Just and it's not completely their fault. It's just in the field, suspensions are very, very difficult, right? Like, you're not going to get lab quality cryopreservation when someone died and no one found them for 3 hours, and then finally they get to the hospital and they're declared dead, and then we have to get them to the cryonics facility, and it's just like, it's such a, it's a terrible process that they have to go through. And then finally, once they get there, I mean, we're talking about hours and hours of ischemia, sometimes 18, 24, 36 hours of ischemia, right? And this is just unacceptable. So there's a lot wrong that we have to solve, not only on the science, but also on the logistics side of this. I wanted to figure out how we can eventually get cryonics into hospitals, because I don't see another way that we can really get this at scale to everyone who needs it when they need it, unless it's performed in hospitals directly after legal death, right? Now, of course, that's very difficult. If you walk into a hospital right now and you say, hey, can you guys start doing cryopreservation? Can you start doing cryonics and freezing people? They're going to look at you like you're crazy, and they're not going to do it, right? Luckily, some hospitals have started to cooperate at least a little bit with cryonics facilities, and it makes the process a little bit better, but it's still very, very far from ideal, which we need for good cryopreservations, right? So my idea was to start with animal hospitals, right? Essentially, what Cryopets is we're building here in Salt Lake City, Utah. We're building a hybrid facility where it's essentially half animal hospital, half cryonics facility. So the point of that is, so we don't have to convince the first animal hospital to get on board, because we are the first animal hospital, right? So it kind of solves that problem outright. And essentially what we're doing here is really proving a point, right? We're proving that under an animal hospital cryonic facility hybrid, we can have lab quality cryopreservations, which is extremely important, right? What we can do then is we can go to a third-party neuroscience organization, or one of these well-respected organizations, and we can have them come in and actually, say that we are doing these suspensions very, very well, right? We can get sort of that stamp of approval from a third party that's proving that, since we do have these lab quality cryopreservations, because we can go directly from euthanasia to cryopreservation and there's no delay there, we can actually prove that what we're doing here is very, very real, and it's very effective, that the efficacy is very high, right? So that's incredibly important. But also what we can do is prove that under the same roof, people will be a lot more inclined to opt in to this process. I believe that when this is something that's being offered by your doctor, that it's a completely different conversation, right? Rather than some facility in the middle of nowhere that, people don't really know what's going on there. So once we sort of prove this point, what we have is real numbers, right? We can go to these veterinary hospitals and we can say, okay, under these circumstances, when this is something that's built directly into the hospital, this many people opt into this process. You have to understand, veterinary hospitals are for-profits. They want to make money, right? They're not going to go out of their way to do this unless they have a way to make money. So we can say, okay, you make this much more, rather than just euthanasia. You can make this much more per customer who's opting into this process. This percentage of people opt into the actual cryopreservation process. And then once we have those numbers, we go to them, we can equip them for free. We can train them for free. We don't have to charge them at all, right? And once we have 50 veterinary hospitals, one in every state, we reach all 400 million pets across the country, right? So the idea here is that, a long time ago, I think almost the original idea of cryonics was flawed from the beginning. I think we went to humans too fast, which was a problem. But at the end of the day, scientists are going to go as far as you let them, right? So because we could do humans and start with humans, that's what we did, right? So I think that was part of the problem. And then, the other part of the problem, I think, is actually them starting as nonprofits. I don't think that was a good route. I think they sort of ditched the idea that cryonics can be scalable and actually be venture backable and bring a lot of money into that space. So I think that was another mistake, but I think we can correct these now. We can bring a lot of money into the space. We can offer real lab quality cryopreservations to pets. And that's, that basically brings us to now.
Yes, thank you very much, Kai, for this overview. And it is indeed quite a fascinating concept to bring cryonics to pets. I agree that it could greatly help with the mass adoption of cryonics as an option that many people consider. Now, before we delve into cryopets in particular, I would like to ask a bit more about your thoughts on the prospects for reaching longevity escape velocity in our lifetimes, because as you mentioned, you did speak with Aubrey de Grey, and Aubrey has essentially maintained his projected timeline for the arrival of longevity escape velocity with about a 50% probability. And he states this may happen about 15 years from now, so 2037 or so. And this was fairly consistent with his original time frame. Later in the early 2010s, he had stated that the number of years of progress that were gained were less than the number of years that had elapsed because of insufficient funding up to that time. But now he essentially says the funding problem has largely been solved. The bottleneck is now in terms of enough research talent coming into the field. You mentioned the regulatory red tape as being a major obstacle. So do you think that Aubrey's projections discount the severity of those regulatory obstacles and that there needs to be more attention paid toward it? And do you think if there were a concerted political, policy-oriented, advocacy-oriented push to remove some of those barriers, that life extension within our lifetimes, reaching longevity escape velocity, would become more attainable?
Yeah. So first of all, I really like Aubrey de Grey. I think we do disagree on the timeline for LEV, but I have a lot of respect for him regardless, right? Yeah. I mean, I don't predicting something is going to happen in 15 years. I think is his current, if I remember correctly, 15 years. Predicting if something is going to happen in 15 years or not with like a 50% chance, like I don't think that's based on anything real. I think that's mostly just like a shot in the dark hypothesis, right? Which is fine, and it's okay to be optimistic. I think we have to be optimistic to accomplish anything, right? But I don't think there's much that you can really base that on, because if we're basing it on how much progress we've made thus far, then we're probably still hundreds of years out, right? Hopefully things start scaling up more, but I mean, even I suppose I just don't really know what he's basing that on. As I said, we don't even have a clear definition for what aging is. I think SENS has done a pretty good job at trying to categorize the 7 types of damage inside of cells, but it's essentially, as far as I'm aware, ignoring the extracellular matrix. I think we have these. We're trying to come up with clocks so we can basically measure how much an intervention is actually working. But as of now, these clocks, we don't even really know what they're telling us. I mean, DNA methylation, we don't really understand what these changes mean yet, and if they actually are a reflection of biological age. I would say they're very likely not. So it's difficult to I think right now it's impossible to say like, yeah, maybe 50% chance in 15 years or something. I just don't think that's based on anything real. I think it's mostly that's mostly hope with a little bit of anyway, I don't want to put a damper on the whole longevity field. I think it's fantastic work, and it needs to happen because essentially it's probably useless to revive most people from cryopreservation unless we have complete control over the aging process. I think most people, when they are cryopreserved, they usually die of age-related causes, right? So we would have to essentially solve those and rejuvenate them upon revival. So it wouldn't really make sense to revive people otherwise. But I think there obviously does need to be a ton of focus on these regulative barriers, but what we're talking about is essentially just the healthcare and biotech industry in general, right? Like this isn't something that's only plaguing longevity. Of course, it'd be awesome if the NIH took, actually reversing aging more seriously, right? That'd be fantastic. But the NIH has also been putting an overwhelming amount of money into cancer research for a very long time with practically nothing to show for it. So it's difficult to say that if we clear up those regulatory barriers that we're going to make, an amazing amount of progress here. I think biology is incredibly hard. And I think, when it comes to cryopreserving and recovering slightly more complex and larger organs that we have in the past versus completely understanding and reversing the aging process, I'd very much rather put my faith in the cryonics route, just because it's much more straightforward. So I think it is important work. I don't think it made sense for me specifically to work on it, just because I don't think I think it is out of the reach in our lifetimes. But maybe I'm just overly pessimistic. Time will tell. So.
Yes, well, I hope that you're overly pessimistic, Kai, because you're the youngest person on this program right now. So I do think that the two approaches are complementary, and Aubrey would agree with that statement because he does believe there are low-hanging fruit to be picked in the cryonics space. So it is important to pursue them in concert, and as you pointed out, the possibility would exist, even if one is indefinitely long-lived, that one could experience some sort of accident or some sort of acute illness that would necessitate cryopreservation given the state of the technology at that time. Also, we'd like to thank our friend Alan Crowley for his generous contribution, and he writes, lab quality cryo for animal studies is very intriguing, and hopefully Cryopets, by inviting research organizations to evaluate the quality of the cryopreservation, will be able to catalyze advances in that realm. I know that there has been a lot of discussion about damage that occurs during the cryopreservation process. Right now, the leading technique is vitrification, and vitrification literally means turning to glass. So if you turn a tissue to glass, how do you then undo that so that you have functioning organs? I believe this has been done with smaller organs of simpler mammals like rabbit kidneys. This has been done with simple organisms like C. elegans, for example, but doing it with humans may be more complicated. So we now have a question from David Shoemaker. He wonders, Kai, do you feel an advantage coming to the cryo space from the tech world?
Yeah, so I would say a really, really large advantage, right? Essentially, every time I talk to basically any one of the cryonic facilities that are running, but probably like CI and Alcor specifically, every time I learn about a new way that they're doing something, every time I talk to one of their employees, I get another note on my list of absolutely horrible things that they're doing, right? Horrible, I just mean wrong. Like, I think there really hasn't been a ton of competition in this field. There's really just been the core main facilities for a very long time. And I think for the most part, I think their hearts are in the right place. I just don't think there's an incredible amount of talent at either of these organizations, specifically when it comes to things like, customer experience, when it comes to marketing, when it comes to anything tech related, right? Even the tech of their websites and everything is so incredibly outdated. So I've talked to people who are Alcor members who, have been Alcor members for 8, 9, 10 years, and I've never gotten a single email from Alcor about, hey, where do you live now? Are there any new health concerns that we should be aware of? How are you doing? Literally anything, right? These are people that give the organization thousands of dollars every year. And plus, I've even, talked to Alcor a few times about setting up something for my cat specifically, because just in case something were to happen in these next, year or so until I get my facility up and running, right? Because I have an older cat. And they have absolutely no, they're not interested in setting up any sort of custom plan with me, working with me at all, as far as getting like standby in like a veterinary hospital. It's just, there's not, I think there's just a lot of trouble when it comes to actually working with the customers that they're just very, very outdated on. I think these organizations really need, they need talent. They need talent in a lot of different ways. And in their defense, these are nonprofits, and they don't really have the money to get that amazing talent. And like I said before, I think that was the wrong route. But coming from tech, I think, I do have a lot of experience when it comes to obviously the tech software, but also, marketing, dealing with customers, getting a team together that actually, makes the customers happy and stays up to date on what they're doing. And I think these are all things that the current organizations are doing very, very poorly. And then also just speed, right? Alcor has been around, I guess it was the 50th anniversary this year, right? And it's still a very, very fringe topic. Cryonics in general is a very, very fringe topic. This is a problem. Like, this isn't just, every industry goes through this and we'll be fine. This is a failure by a lot of people in the industry, cryonics still being a fringe topic. So I think speed, marketing experience, and just running a business, right? I think there's not a great amount of talent at these organizations. And look, I don't want to roast Alcor all day, but the CEO didn't even show up at his own event, the 50th anniversary, and then a couple weeks after the event, he disappears from the website. No one even knows who's running Alcor right now. This is ridiculous. This is completely ridiculous. There just needs to be much better leadership at these organizations, which just doesn't exist right now. All those things are what I'm going to be bringing to the cryonic space for sure.
Very interesting. And thank you for being candid and sharing your thoughts. Now, we do have an interesting discussion that we could pursue on the type of organization and organizational model that would be best in achieving the growth of the cryonics field. Our friend Alan Crowley has a question along these lines, and then I'll have a follow-up question. But Alan's question is, if profitability will bring sustainability, what are the avenues for entrepreneurs, startups, and new businesses to get into cryonics, or what Alan calls the phyto freezing business?
Yes, phyto freezing. I might steal that. That's pretty good. So as far as avenues, it's difficult, right? There's a reason that most of these organizations chose to be nonprofits. It's because it is difficult to be a for-profit in cryonics right now, right? There's not some overwhelmingly obvious market that we can just target right now. I think it's Keith Rabois who said, product market fit is forged, not found, right? If there were a ton of people who already wanted to have their pets frozen, and this is something that people talked about all the time, there would already be organizations, a lot of organizations that offer this and compete with each other, right? So it is going to take, companies like mine and hopefully a few others that come in and sort of build this market and sort of forge that product market fit, right? But I mean, there's definitely, I think there's ways to get in organ cryopreservation is another fantastic route, which is going to be amazingly profitable. I think I'm probably the first one to take a stab at, the pet route specifically, but I think, it is going to be another one of those routes that, as long as it has the right leadership behind it, can be very, very profitable. And I hope we have competitors. I welcome all competitors. That's what moves these fields forward. I feel bad for them because they're not going to be able to outcompete me. But anyone who wants to try, I'd be more than happy to take them on. So, it's I don't think it's like some beautiful open season for entrepreneurs to jump into cryonics. It's going to take some really, really crafty ideas to make it happen. So.
Yes, well, would-be cryonics entrepreneurs, take note, you have been challenged by Kai Micah Mills. Now, speaking of the entrepreneurial route, you mentioned that it has certain advantages over the nonprofit model. Of course, one of the advantages of the nonprofit model is that as long as a steady influx of donations is maintained, the nonprofit can operate at a certain level indefinitely, whereas a for-profit business requires engaging in commercial transactions that continue to be profitable. So attention has to be paid over whether revenues exceed costs, for instance. And there is, of course, a history with startups. About 95% of startups do not survive their first 5 years, and cryonics is a long-term enterprise. One would need organizations that can at least keep the doers powered and keep the liquid nitrogen in them for decades and centuries, whatever time frame is needed to revive the patients, be they humans or pets. So my question for you is, for someone who is following the startup route, hopefully growing that startup into a larger business, how does one avoid the fates of so many startups, which would be failure within 5 years? How does one create something that lasts through the centuries, essentially?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So there's a couple things. 95% of startups fail. It might even be more. I think that number is what it is because startups are very, very difficult, of course. And there's a lot of people who don't know what they're doing that attempt to start startups, right? So they just fail very quickly. These, most of these aren't even like venture-backed companies, right? So if you take like, experienced entrepreneurs, second or third time founders that are starting startups, the success rate is much, much higher. So that's the first thing. Now, to be clear, I think any organization trying to plan for lasting hundreds of years is a fool's errand. I think it's a waste of time. I don't think any of these organizations are going to last hundreds of years. I don't think they need to last hundreds of years, right? You go to your local hospital. The hospital makes money. It's a for-profit, right? That's perfectly fine. What we really need eventually, and when I say eventually, I mean, please God, not anytime soon, but eventually is more regulation in the cryonic space, right? I mean, if you're a facility that houses people's bodies, these people who, over time, once we, get brain cryopreservation a little further, the government's probably going to consider these to be patients, right? Not just bodies anymore, right? Once we get to that point, we need regulation where these facilities need to meet certain standards, right? They need to have certain employees that are trained in certain ways. They need to be doctors on hand. They need to, there just needs to be oversight there, right? And when there is that oversight, and when these people are looked at as patients, then even if a facility has to shut down for whatever reason, then these patients would just be transferred somewhere else, right? So I don't think any one cryonics facility has to last hundreds of years, or whatever that time frame is until revival. And I think like pouring a lot of resources into setting that up and trying to make that happen is mostly just wasting resources. So that's one of the points on it. Another point is, nonprofits in general. I think there's almost this notion that like nonprofits are good and companies are bad, which is just not the case. Nonprofits can just as easily misallocate resources. They can just as easily have bad intentions. I think Peter Thiel even talks about this in 0 to 1, where a lot of these nonprofits, you'll see they have very large boards. Boards that are like 6, 7, 8, 9 people. They all have their accolades listed on there, but they practically do nothing, right? And then you have the one dictator of the board that's really doing everything. I think, I think these cryonic facilities, maybe it helps with that sort of reputation a little bit, because it's a nonprofit and it's like, okay, our goal isn't specifically just to make money here. But I don't think any facility needs to be preparing to last for hundreds of years, because just statistically it wouldn't make sense to bet on that. I mean, how many companies or organizations have lasted hundreds of years, right? And the ones that have are very, very iconic and very, very successful in the ways that, in their respective industries. So, I wouldn't bet my life on that by any means, right? I'd rather bet my life on the science getting far enough for the government to consider these people and actually have rights over their property and have rights over their lives still, and then being protected that way. So yeah, I mean, as far as I don't think that's the biggest worry, right? Aside from that, we have the same risks as any startup has. But at the end of the day, we need to start moving this tech faster than it is right now. The field has just been very, very slow for a long time. And the way to do that is by bringing a lot of money into the space very fast and just getting things done. So.
Very interesting. Thank you for that response. And it does look like the key to solving this dilemma, in your view, is to have a regulatory framework that protects the rights of cryopreserved patients, be they humans or pets, so that in the event that one particular cryonics business is no longer able to keep operating, there is a protocol for transferring those patients to another facility, and hopefully there would be enough facilities able and willing to take those patients. Probably there would need to be some sort of governmental backstop cryonics facility in that situation as well, at least for temporarily holding the patients while their arrangements with another private cryonics facility are being made. Now we have a question from Dr. Jose Cordero. So Jose, please proceed.
Well, hello and congratulations on what you are doing. I think it is really admirable that you are starting with a Cryopets facility and idea, because we need this and much more around the world. So also, I think it is very interesting what you said, that Alcor is not very, very responsive. But sadly, I think it is the same with Cryonics Institute and also with CryoRules. The only ones who are bringing in competition are the Germans, the Swiss, Tomorrow Biostasis and the European Biostasis Foundation, because they are based on marketing. So they actually have a different mentality. So I think that is an interesting point. But I am organizing a big conference in Madrid about cryonics in November. I always organize transhumanist conferences, some based more on artificial intelligence. And I brought the robot Sophia, the humanoid robot Sophia, some more on longevity with Aubrey de Grey and so many other people. And this one will be about cryonics in November. So first, I want to invite you to come to beautiful Spain, to Madrid in November, for one thing. And the second thing, what is the timetable of your initiative? How do you see this evolving? How long will it take? Are we talking about months, years, decades? How do you have it in your mind, and what kind of funding is still needed, please?
Yeah, well, thank you for the invite. I will definitely try to make it. You said it's in November, right? I don't think I have any events scheduled for November yet, so I will see if I can make it over to Spain. So I will let you know. As far as a timetable for this, so we've raised a good amount of money already. We've basically started with some of the preliminary steps. That includes market research, basically running a lot of surveys on pet owners in the U.S. and figuring out what the what the general sentiment is towards cryopreserving your pets. Obviously, that's one of the biggest questions for an investor is, okay, who's going to do this, right? Sounds fantastic, but hey, is anyone actually going to buy this? And the results of those surveys are pretty impressive, and I think probably a lot better than you might think. We had something like, I think 25% of people who were opposed to pet cryopreservation. And then there's like 40-some% in the maybe area, and then there's a 30-some% in the yes for cryopreserving their pet. So really, it's kind of a and that's the average among all of them. But it's a big group that obviously we have to turn that interest and that being open to pet cryopreservation into actual customers, which is our job, right? But it's been good to see that it is a fairly small group of people who are actually against it. And what you'll find, and we see this in the longevity industry as well, is these dog aging companies are actually going very well because in a lot of ways people are willing to do for their pets what they won't do for themselves, and it's also much more affordable. Right, it's Cryonics especially is a lot cheaper when it comes to pets versus humans. So yeah, we've been doing a lot of market research. Beyond that, I've been working with an architect here in Salt Lake City to start sort of designing what this is going to look like. For the most part, it's an animal hospital, right? But there is obviously the extra space that we'll need for the storage, some lab space. So it's like a configured animal hospital, right? And then yeah, I'll be bringing on a CSO probably pretty soon, and then a few of the other key first hires. But as far as having the facility built, once we start building it, it'll take like 6 to 8 months. So it should be built by next year. Having it open for cryopreservation is a different topic, right? Because once this facility is actually built, we have to equip it with the veterinarians and actually have a functioning animal hospital, right? Because this is the same place that people are going to go for their dog surgeries to get their cat's teeth cleaned, right? It's an animal hospital through and through, right? And so there is that setup that we have to do at first. And then we're going to bring in likely Tanya Jones and perhaps a few others to do the actual training and train our veterinarians to perform the cryopreservation procedures, because which I mentioned earlier, no one who is not a doctor is going to be performing procedures on these animals, right? So these are going to be trained veterinarians who are doing these procedures that we're going to train in the cryopreservation procedures. And then, finally, once we have standardized, procedures for at least cats and dogs, then we'll be able to actually open it up for, cryopreservation to the public. So if I had to, put a guess on it, I would say we could probably start doing that like very, very early 2024, or late 2023 if things go very well. But yeah, I think that's probably the best prediction I could make on the timeline.
Very interesting. Thank you, Kai, for sharing those plans. And we definitely wish you success in realizing that time frame that you have articulated. Now I would like to go to Charlie Cam and see what questions or comments he has.
Oh, yeah. Hi. You couldn't hear me all right then, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Kai, it's great to meet you. Yeah, I agree with your logic behind your calculations 100%. I've been involved in Cryonics for decades. I've been a member for that long. It's interesting. You mentioned Itzkoff. My inspiration way back in the day was was people like Drexler and Ray Kurzweil, and Itzkoff picked the name of his company 2045 based on Ray's projection of the singularity in 2045. And I met Itzkoff in the New York conference, and I had the same ideas about doing what he wanted to do. And unfortunately, like you said, he's kind of not to be found these days. But I really like what you want to do. I think this is a brilliant idea of starting off with pets, and it'll make the idea of cryonics a lot more acceptable. So I'll contact you after today's conference or our interview today, and see if I can help with the funding and whatever else you need, because I think it's an important step of what you're doing, and I look forward to seeing this become a big success.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's fantastic to meet you as well, and it's cool that you met Dimitri. Maybe if you ever find them at some point, you can intro me, because I want to thank him for he inspired me to get in the field, right? So I don't know what he's working on these days, but it'd be cool to meet him. But yeah, for sure, we'll definitely talk, and I appreciate it.
Sure.
Yes, thank you, Charlie, and thank you, Kai. My understanding is the 2045 initiative essentially utilized most of its initial funding that Dmitry Itzkov provided, and there were some issues. I'm not really aware of the details, but let's say Dmitry Itzkov and Vladimir Putin didn't exactly see eye to eye, and that may have prevented additional funding from coming into the 2045 initiative, which is a shame. It shows the perils of entrepreneurship under an autocratic regime. I wish Dmitry Itzkov did have a steadier flow of funds to contribute to something like the 2045 initiative, because a lot of his time frames have elapsed already. I believe he wanted to generate full body avatars of people by 2020, and unfortunately that has not transpired. Now, our friend Mike Lazine expresses certain reservations about at least the logistics of cryopreservation. He writes, having an organization be in charge of your future life with cryonics is taking a huge leap of faith when so many things can go wrong, natural disasters wiping out where you are frozen, etc. And I understand this is one reason why Alcor built its facility in Scottsdale, Arizona, because there are fewer natural disasters there. The potential for a large earthquake is very low. There's essentially no hurricane risk there, no real tornado risk. And the Cryonics Institute is based in Michigan. Michigan can have severe winter storms, but it also probably isn't going to have a large earthquake. It probably isn't going to get a hurricane just wiping out a cryonics facility. So is overcoming this particular concern just a matter of where you locate your facility? And if so, do you believe Salt Lake City is a sufficiently robust location for that purpose?
Yeah, so Salt Lake City is the 4th safest city in the United States from natural disasters. This is ranked by FEMA, I believe. I think, I'm trying to remember the first ones. I think they're somewhere in Ohio. I think Dayton, Ohio was actually the first one for some reason. And then there was another location in Ohio, and Syracuse, New York is another one of them, and then Salt Lake City. So it is ranked higher than Scottsdale, Arizona. I think, no, I mean, it's a fantastic point. Like for even if you have to be at that facility for 50 years before you're transferred somewhere else, or you do want to be somewhere where natural disasters are, very, very low, right? So yeah, that was very important when I was choosing to place the facility in Salt Lake City. I believe Alcor has even considered moving up to Utah in the past. So it is a really fantastic spot for that. Generally in the just sort of this part of the United States, kind of the western side, but not the coast, it is a really fantastic area, as long as you don't get too close to Yellowstone, I guess. But most of it's a really fantastic area for a cryonics facility long term. I guess because the good news is that obviously the liquid nitrogen keeps you at negative 196 with the current storage methods. Even if the power goes out, I mean, this liquid nitrogen really only needs topped off once every few weeks. And really it could probably go a few months before it starts causing any serious damage, without being refilled. I mean, especially since I think Alcor and I think all the facilities actually keep the patients upside down for that reason, just in case there's a bit of higher temperature at the top, right? But anyway, I am very interested in ITS, keeping people at like negative 130, negative 140, animals as well. It is something that I would like to look into, just because once you go below negative 140, you start to have those large scale fractures, right? For preserving people for a long time, it probably would be better to keep people at ITS, intermediate temperature storage, right? But obviously that's much more expensive. It also comes with more risks because if the power goes out, then the power that's keeping the doer at that temperature is gone, right? So you need backup generators, and it gets a little more risky. But yeah, with current preservation methods, I mean, it would take a lot for something to happen to your doer. I mean, you would need like a really, really unbelievable earthquake to, basically, put your body in any kind of harm. So I would be less concerned about natural disasters as long as you're in one of those good states, which we mentioned, and probably more concerned about people. Right. I mean, I think it's important to also have these facilities in safe areas with generally low crime. Salt Lake City has a very high concentration of Mormons, of course. Mormons may protest us silently, but they're not going to riot and start to take down the facility. Right. They're generally very nice people. So it's a good location for it. And but no, I mean, you definitely make a good point. You do have to put your faith in the human race if you're going under cryostasis, right? But I think most people who opt in for this are people who generally believe that the future is going to be better than it is now, and generally believe that humanity is going to keep getting better and better. And I believe that. I think humanity is incredible. I think we get things wrong, but at the end of the day, we always seem to be improving in the grand scheme of things. So I think we'll continue on that path.
Yes. Thank you for that response, Kai, and it does offer some reassurance. I agree, by the way, Mormons tend to be quite nice and well-behaved people. In fact, there is a large population of Mormon transhumanists in Utah. We interviewed Carl Youngblood as well as Lincoln Cannon for our previous virtual Enlightenment salons, and I would encourage our audience to check out those discussions. Now, we have another question from Genghis Khan, who asks, curious, how long does Kai foresee how a cryopet can be kept in that state? So I believe this viewer is asking, how long can a cryopet be preserved in some sort of stable state? What sort of maintenance would be required? I believe you touched a bit on maintenance for humans. What would you envision to be the maintenance procedure for pets?
No, it's pretty similar. I mean, at negative 196, I think a second of our time is like a million years of basically a million years at negative 196, that temperature Celsius, is about a one second of biological movement at our temperatures, right? So practically indefinitely, right? I mean, we can keep this pet here as long as needed, without any more damage occurring. So I mean, hopefully, Yeah, I mean, we'll be able to bring pets out of cryostasis much earlier than we can bring humans, because we do have these lab quality cryopreservations, right? When it comes to humans, I mean, we just have no idea how we're going to basically infer where things were before the damage took place. I mean, these are just technology that we don't have yet, if we ever can, right? In these procedures that weren't lab quality, that didn't go incredibly well. So, yeah, but no, we'll be able to keep the pets there practically indefinitely. So,
good news. Now, Mike Lazine raises a few other concerns. He writes, there's also the issue of government interference or other changing conditions as time goes on, especially with climate change. So how would you address those? Do you believe there's a risk of governments becoming hostile even to cryopreservation of pets? As I understand it, there are several European countries that currently ban cryopreservation of humans on their territory, which is rather perplexing and unfortunate in my view. Do you foresee any resistance politically to cryopreservation of pets? And also, how would you address the climate change concern?
Yeah, so with pets specifically, I mean, you can, we basically circumvent almost all the legal restrictions. Humans, there's a lot of, sometimes there's autopsy requirements. The human has to be pronounced dead by a nurse or a doctor at the hospital usually, and yes, if they don't die in a very straightforward way, there are times where they have to keep the body for quite some time. So basically as a facility that specifically works with pets, I mean, we're circumventing essentially all of the legal issues. When it comes to animals, there's just there's practically no issues that we have to overcome there. I'm sure Mike is also referring to humans on this, right? I was talking about earlier where facilities don't really have to last hundreds of years and where we do want government to come in at some point. I believe that will happen maybe once we revive the first mammal from cryopreservation and we can prove that long-term memory is preserved. Maybe it'll take longer. I mean, generally the government's pretty stupid, so it'll probably take them a long time to figure out that this is something that's even working, right? But when they do, perhaps when we can, maybe fully vitrify and then reverse a human brain or something, maybe that would be the catalyst. But whatever that catalyst is, I think it'll get to the point where we will work with the government, and that will be a fantastic thing. I don't think that's a problem. I think generally, cryonicists in the past have been, there has been sort of a battle between cryonics and the government in the past, and I don't see that as the future. I think this is a medical procedure. Once it's in hospitals and once it's accepted widely as just sort of a new form of emergency medicine, then we're not going to have any problem with government interference. So I don't worry too much about that. I think it's the government will be on board eventually, and it's a good thing that they're not, because it sort of gives us the freedom we need to move incredibly quickly. So
yes, generally in the early stages of developing a particular technology or business model, it is best if the government has nothing to say or do about that model, because generally speaking, politicians do not understand emerging technologies, and any attempts to regulate them may attempt to impose an older understanding upon a new field where that understanding no longer applies. Now, I'm curious what you would have to say to Mike's comment about climate change. Would it be that climate change is gradual enough that you would be able to anticipate it, and if the need arises, relocate the patients to a more hospitable location?
Yeah, so practically no amount of climate change would ever pose a risk to anyone in cryostasis, right? It could be, 200 degrees Fahrenheit outside, and as long as there's people who are keeping people in these dewars that are specifically made to keep what's inside the dewar at -196 with the liquid nitrogen. I mean, obviously, if the outside temperature is 200 degrees Fahrenheit, I mean, we have other problems, right? Like something really went wrong. But generally, yeah, climate change isn't going to pose a threat to people inside cryostasis until they get out of cryostasis, and then they would have to deal with it, right? Yeah, I don't think that would be a worry. I think this is also a lesson that the longevity field can take from climate change, is that there's actually been a pretty impressive call to arms, if you will, around climate change, where a lot of countries are working together to get very serious about it. So if the same thing happened for tackling the aging problem, then we would probably have a pretty good shot at solving it in our lifetimes. How do you make something like that happen? It's difficult, right? We have a lot of people who still don't think that aging or death in general are even really bad things, for the most part, because they think something comes after it. If we can make that happen, who knows? But yeah, I wouldn't worry about climate change in relation to patients in cryostasis.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you, Kai. And I would agree with your assessment. Indeed, I wish that Greta Thunberg, instead of focusing on climate change, had used her particular methods to maybe encourage is a bit of a mild term to use given her tactics, but to motivate politicians and other institutional figures to take action on reversing biological aging, because that is certainly a problem that requires that kind of mobilization. You are correct. If we can achieve that kind of mobilization, then we are going to have a fighting chance. This is what the US Transhumanist Party ultimately seeks to accomplish, and this is what we are going to continue working toward. Of course, in the current cultural and attitudinal climate, as you pointed out, this is an uphill battle, but I just don't see any alternative to fighting that battle nonetheless. All the while, entrepreneurs like yourself will hopefully advance the science and the technological capabilities in fields like cryonics, which will certainly help with a perception of the realism of these aspirations among the general public. Even if cryonics doesn't directly address the age reversal problem, at least we can point to progress being made in the life extension field more broadly. And that, I think, could help lead more people to understand this is a practical goal, hopefully within our lifetimes. Now I would like to see if Art Ramon has any questions or comments.
I know we have like a doomsday seed bank in Norway or somewhere, but I don't know if they have honeybees in those seed banks. So that's probably something we should look at, is the cryonic preservation of honeybees, because what's good of having all these seeds if you don't have any way of pollinating them? Also, livestock. There might be, these governments might have doomsday bunkers for, VIPs. And if there's some sort of, nuclear war, small nuclear war that creates nuclear winter, and there's just nothing alive on the surface, we're going to need livestock also. And probably cryonic preservation of chickens and, cattle, horses. We might have to go back to riding horses for a while. So I think that would be a direction to go in where you can get government funding. Cryonic preservation of bees, livestock. And I think definitely that would get some income. The pets, I'm sure that's profitable. But if you want, government funding and government contracts, probably livestock and bees, because that's going to, help with the existential threats that, humanity has.
Yeah, no, I think generally it would be smart to make somewhat of a Noah's Ark with cryonics at some point, right? I think that would be fantastic, especially when it comes to endangered species, right? So that, to your point, yeah, there are a few routes that we can take to get grants here and there, right? It's not something that we are essentially, I'm not expecting grants and hoping that we'll get government backing on this, just because it's generally just it's difficult, right, for this sort of field right now. Yeah, I think I've gotten a lot of excitement from investors on cryopreserving endangered species specifically, because there's really not a fantastic way to save them otherwise right now. I know, George Church is working on bringing back the woolly mammoth. Essentially what he's doing is making like a furry Asian elephant, right? Which is very cool, but it's not the woolly mammoth, right? It would have been fantastic if we just cryopreserved the woolly mammoth, of course, and then eventually we could bring it back. Yeah, I mean, I would love to put some focus on that. As far as cryopreserving insects, yeah, I mean, that's very interesting. I would love to run some experiments on honeybees and see what we can preserve there. I think, yeah, I mean, because we've gotten requests for all kinds of animals, right? I've gotten inbound for people who want to cryopreserve their hamsters, cats, dogs, horses, reptiles, you name it. So, we're going to start with cats and dogs of average sizes, initially. But yeah, I mean, we're going to have a wide range of these procedures eventually. I'm not sure if bees will be one of the first we do, but definitely something I will put on the list. I think that could be smart. So, yeah.
Yes, thank you, Kai. And now let's go to Ben Ballweg.
Hi, Kai. Thanks for being here today. I am curious about if you're going to be getting into any revival research or where revival research is right now. And I've been dying all of this salon so far for what David Shoemaker was going to be saying. So I defer whatever other time to what his questions will be.
All right. Well, we'll go to David after Kai answers Ben's question.
Sure. So, yeah. So the thing with revival research, because I mean, there's companies that are already working on nanotech, right, and trying to research that entire field. I think it's, generally the approach in the field thus far has been, it doesn't really matter how much damage occurs because the future will be able to fix it, which is a pretty bad hypothesis generally, right? I'm all for humanity, but I think we do have our limits, right, for what we'll be able to repair in the future. So I think the key to revival is innately reversible cryopreservation, right? So that's what I'm interested in mostly, is how we can cryopreserve an organ, reverse the process without some crazy nanotech in the future, right? I don't think that's so that entire section of the revival research is something that I'm just not interested in. Now, as far as different rewarming methods and different methods that allow us to be have organs that are innately reversible after being cryopreserved is something I'm very, very interested in. I think probably the most interesting area to me, I suppose, in the last 5 to 10 years has been the persiflation work that came out of Aragos. So Aragos Biomedical was led by Tanya Jones and Stephen Van Sickle. I think they started it back in 2014. And what they did was, I think persiflation was used for a very, very long time. It basically means perfusing the organ with gas, in most cases helium, because of its low solubility in water and low inertness overall. They were basically the first ones to theorize that they could use persiflation during the cooling process of organs. And I think this was the first company that Peter Thiel funded out of Breakout Labs. I think, Tanya, of course, was the CEO of Alcor for a little bit, and then she was also at the SENS Research Foundation. And, so they theorized that they could perfuse the organ with gas during the cooling process, essentially found that they could cool the organ much, much faster because of this. And it also, protected a great deal against thermal stresses. And I think they were able to recover pig hearts from and other large pig organs from, I think it was like -120, -130. So it was a really, really impressive result. I would say even more impressive than we've seen in sort of like the rabbit kidney studies that of course, were going for similar outcomes, right? So Stephen Van Sickle ended up dying in, I believe, 2019, and Aragos ended up running out of money. And if there was anything on the research end of cryonics that I would throw money into right now, it is in persiflation. I think we also need to start experimenting with whole bodies. If we can start with whole body persiflation studies on mouse. On mice, I think that would be a really excellent starting point as far as getting innately reversible cryopreservation, just because the outcomes were so much better. And I think, because here's the problem, right? There's certain isolated organs obviously are going to be much easier. We know that, than whole bodies. Luckily we have this amazing circulatory system. So when we do perfuse the body, we're getting most of those tissues pretty well. There are certain tissues that don't cryopreserve well. Skeletal muscle tissue, fatty tissues. These are historically, and of course, there's not an incredible amount of research in this area in the first place, but historically in the research that has been done, these tissues are difficult to penetrate and get to. So even if, I think the first mammal revival, let's say of a mouse, would probably look something like we could, cryopreserve the brain and the other organs, perfuse the body, but we probably wouldn't be able to reversibly do those tissues that don't cryopreserve well. So it would probably put the animal in a pretty uncomfortable state. But if they can preserve their long-term memory, that's fantastic. And that's a huge breakthrough, right? So I think persiflation is probably one of the really exciting areas that I'd like to look into and research in for the revival part. But we're just going to need so much more research there. Like, it's just, So, but yeah, absolutely. It's something that I'll have a lot of focus on for sure. So
thank you.
Yes, thank you, Kai. And I would say that a successful revival of even a small mammal from cryopreservation could lead to that paradigm shift in public perception, because even if a mouse could be successfully revived and one could see it running around, functioning in the way that a mouse would, that would lead to at least an inkling in many people's minds that perhaps the same could be done with humans. Now let us go to David Shoemaker by popular demand.
Thank you. Actually, that was a good segue to the top question that I have on my list. And if we only have time for one, this is the one that I want to talk about. But I'll start first by mentioning that in the chat, I listed a book recommendation, a book that I recently read. And Kai, you and I talked about it a little bit at the Alcor conference. And the book has the auspicious name of Machines for Making Gods. And the subtitle is Mormonism, Transhumanism, and Worlds Without End. And I really found the book to be fascinating because it took transhumanism and religion off of a collision course and showed that, especially with Mormonism, they overlap. And it did this by talking about histories of both movements and bringing them together. The reason I bring that book recommendation up is my question relates to that as well. I consider myself a Christian transhumanist. I speak with Christians and find, based on their particular place in the spectrum in Christianity, either acceptance or complete rejection to my ideas around transhumanism, but at least I'm able to have conversations except with the most unreasonable people. After reading this book, my understanding is that I think there's more overlap with Mormonism than Christianity for transhumanism. You having your first facility in Salt Lake, I think that speaks to the fact that maybe we have two very powerful organizations that can ally and bring a more positive conversation about religion and transhumanism together, especially if you're in a business world making profits and have a demonstrable product. So after that long lead in, would you like to speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, so for what it's worth, I grew up Mormon. I grew up very, very Mormon. So it was around that time that I was pulling away from religion when I found the 2445 initiative. I was a very, very strong and active Mormon up until that point. There is a lot of overlap. Mormonism specifically, they have a lot of stories in the Book of Mormon about. I think it's even I think it's 3rd Nephi chapter 28, I believe 27, something around there, where it talks about basically these 3 Nephites, as they were called, who I believe Jesus asks them what they want, and at the end of the conversation, they basically decide that they want to live, they don't want to die, and they wanted to stay on Earth and avoid death and keep living and keep serving, and they were actually rewarded for this. And I think they even think that those 3 people are still around today. I'm not sure where they are, but maybe lurking around somewhere. That mixed with the fact that Mormons also believe that they believe in physical resurrection of the body here on Earth, right? They believe that we'll go through a period called the millennium, or I believe it's 1,000 years, where there will be no death on Earth. And so they also kind of see the Mormon transhumanists see cryonics as basically a way that gets us there to that step. There is and there's other stories in the Book of Mormon and even in the Bible that definitely has overlap with cryonics. And I spoke at the Mormon Transhumanist event, a couple, I think it was a couple months ago. So I got to talk with, Lincoln Cannon mostly, and they're all pretty, they're all very, pro cryonics. They really like cryonics over there. So you're definitely right in probably a lot of my first, customers for pet cryonics will probably be some of the Mormon transhumanists, right? And who are local to the area. I think it is really interesting to see that overlap. When I do surveys on why people would not want to be interested, or why people aren't interested in pet cryopreservation, that 25% of people who oppose it are religious. I would say like 90% of those 25% of people are religious. So most of the people who are against it, and when they leave a comment why, they'll basically say it's against God, it's against nature, this is wrong for whatever religious reason, right? So I think this really comes down to a communication thing, right? Just because you believe in an afterlife doesn't mean you're in a rush to get there, right? Religious people are not against CPR, right? They're not against going and getting medicine when they need it, going and getting a surgery when they need it. This cryonics is just another form of emergency medicine. We're saying basically, we've maxed out what our current medicine can do. We are basically going to halt your biology in this state until we can solve these things later. People should at least have the option to do that. And if you're religious, then that means that you can spend more time on Earth serving and helping your religion get further, instead of watching from the sidelines, I suppose, once you do die. So I don't think there's any conflict between religion and cryonics. I think this is something that we really need to have better communication on. And once this is in hospitals and it's just a medical procedure, I think we'll get much less pushback in that area. And I think the Mormon Transhumanist Association is actually making a lot of really good strides to connect those two. So.
Yes. Thank you very much, Kai, for that answer. And I would agree there's no necessary conflict between religion and cryonics. It's a matter of how one interprets one's theology, and certainly many interpretations are conducive to a compatibility between a belief in some sort of deity or even some sort of afterlife and life extension or cryopreservation. I had a conversation with an older Christian gentleman at RadFest 2018, where he was originally reluctant to support indefinite life extension because he thought, well, it was God's will that we would eventually go to heaven. But I asked him, would you be in favor of living for 200 years and then seeing how you assess your existence and what you would want to do from that point on? And he said that, yes, he would like to be around for 200 years. And then I said, in that case, you and I are allies because we seek to move in the same direction. And once you are 200 years old, let us speak again and see how much additional life extension you would favor at that time. Our friend Sergei Gubkin also writes, David Shoemaker, we need people like you to spread the message among people of faith, as transhumanism is not going to succeed as an almost exclusively atheist movement unless we convince all atheists, and I don't see that happening. I also see that there are sources of resistance to transhumanism among certain self-proclaimed atheists, people who just think any consideration of indefinite longevity or dramatically extending lifespans as, quote, unscientific or speculative. So they're throwing out the metaphorical baby with the bathwater. And some of those people may be as difficult to convince as the extremely doctrinaire religious people who say, well, this is not in line with God's will. But I also wanted to highlight comments from Super Thin Guy. He writes that he thinks resuscitation is equally important, and he wonders, what about resuscitation with blood infusion? Are you aware of the Soviet experiments that were done in regard to this? He states there is a YouTube documentary on the subject, but one of the aspects where the Soviet scientists were successful, and this was as far back as the 1950s, they could revive the severed head of a dog and keep it functioning for over 100 days. Do you see that as having a place in revival of cryopreserved pets in the future?
Yeah, so I've seen what you're talking about. You can find it online. I probably wouldn't watch it unless you're used to watching that, sort of medical procedures. It's kind of out there, right? Yeah, no, I mean, those experiments were pretty incredible, right? The outcomes of them, I believe, were what led to the heart and lung machine, were some of those early experiments of sort of keeping the essentially you keep the dog's head alive, completely severed from the body, by having the heart and lung machine hooked up to it, which is providing everything it needs. I mean, and I think even Alcor did like total blood washout experiments of dogs in the 70s. Yeah, as far as, resuscitation, I think, as long as we can solve the cryopreservation recovery problem, then resuscitation is going to be one of the easier parts of this, right? Because we've just already done a lot of the preliminary work on it. No, those experiments were very, very interesting. I think, yeah, I mean, it goes to show, what people will really need to see to start believing in this technology, right? Because, even in my opinion, Natasha Vita-Moore's experiments with the C. elegans and preserving their long-term memory was unbelievable. I think that was awesome, right? But it certainly didn't get any, crazy attention. I think, I mean, we've revived, I believe, both hamsters and mice from below 0 degrees. I think you can even get to -2, -3 degrees, and they can still survive and be perfectly fine after resuscitated, of course. Yeah, I mean, I think for the most part, the work on resuscitation is already done as far as the revival process. So it's really going to come down to solving the damage that we still have. I mean, that's it's one of the reasons I was so interested in the persiflation work, is because you can cool the organ much faster. You basically don't have to use anywhere near as many cryoprotectants. So instead of solving the cryoprotectant toxicity problem, you're basically circumventing it, which I thought was, brilliant. So yeah, I think once we get innately reversible cryopreservation, then resuscitation isn't going to be a big deal at all.
Yes, thank you very much, Kai. And Super Thin Guy points out the title of the video documentary that he was referring to: Russian scientists successfully reanimate dead dog's head, from 1940. So this was before the Soviet Union got involved in World War II, and it's fascinating that they could do this so early. I'm not going to post the actual URL here, but if you are really interested, find the documentary and watch it if you have a tolerance for that kind of thing. So there is a bit of a, quote, trigger warning. American Road Warrior also says he remembers that dog experiment, but wishes he didn't watch that video, so it's not for the faint of heart. But
and just to touch on that a little more, because I want to throw one bone back to the longevity area, since I've spent so much time roasting it during this call. The replacement work is very feasible in our lifetime, right? In fact, it's probably the only work that makes sense to focus on in the longevity, in the aging field, is replacement work. Like half the battle is Jean Hebert's work with brain tissue replacement, where because essentially the idea is, okay, we can replace every organ in the body except for the brain, right? We know that. So what you do is you basically replace like a 1 centimeter portion of the brain in certain parts of the brain, and with healthy brain tissue, and that brain tissue over time heals the brain tissue around it. And it can basically, prevent brain aging. I think this is incredibly important because you see experiments like this from back in the 40s where they're working with, dog heads. They've also, I think it was in the 50s or 60s where, I forget which scientist, but he did head transplants of monkeys and kept them alive afterwards. Of course, they were paralyzed from the neck down, and then the body rejected it. So the monkey ended up dying about a week later. But if we can reverse aging of the brain by using the replacement strategy with the tissue, then essentially we can just do whole body replacement, which is perfectly feasible in our lifetimes, because it's really just a surgical problem, right? I mean, you essentially, if you want to do this all the way through, right, you would clone yourself. Would be the most ideal scenario. I mean, we can already clone plenty of animals, so that's not incredibly out of our reach. As far as the government letting us clone ourselves, that might be probably a harder mountain to climb than the actual science itself, right? Essentially, you clone yourself. You give yourself, or not yourself. You give your clone the disability. I forget the name of it. It's not coming to my mind right now. But essentially, the body forms without a brain. And then you'd probably do this, 15 years before you're expecting to get close to dying. That body would grow up. Essentially, it's basically a clone. I mean, it's just a sleeve, right? It's a skeleton. It's not. It doesn't have a brain, right? So it's not like a living, sentient thing, right? It's just a body. And then all you do is either a head transplant or a brain transplant, which is just, like I said, a surgical procedure. It sounds pretty out there, when you try to describe the whole thing. But my main point is that the science of it is very, very feasible in our lifetimes, because most of the science already exists. We can already do head transplants. Like I said, we did it on monkeys back in the day. Brain transplants are a little more difficult, but the body wouldn't reject the head because it's your clone, right? It recognizes it as part of your body. And then, then you would either do a head transplant or a brain transplant, and then use the brain tissue replacement to keep your brain young. So, I mean, obviously that's not like one of the huge focused on areas in longevity because I think it's like pretty morbid, and it seems out there, but it's actually the most easy procedure out of everything that's been proposed in that field. So it's actually the conservative route. So yeah, if anyone's like really wants to focus on the longevity field, I would really recommend replacement as the area to focus on, because if I wasn't working on cryonics, that's probably what I would put my attention towards. So.
Very interesting. Thank you, Kai. And we did have a great virtual Enlightenment Salon with Jean Hébert, where he discussed his ideas about replacing aging, incrementally replacing through surgical means the tissues of the brain. So anybody who is interested in that conversation can watch our salon of April 11th, 2021. Ben Ballweg also pointed out that there was a famous surgeon, Robert J. White, who performed head transplants on monkeys. He lived from 1926 to 2010. So this work is not recent. It transpired decades ago. And I do think that is worth considering, of course, with human head transplants like the ones that Dr. Sergio Canavero at least advertised that he was going to do. I don't know if he had actually performed them. The question becomes, well, whose identity is being preserved if you have a body that is donated from somebody else and you have your brain that is grafted onto that body. I think the full body brainless clone idea is probably the way to go with those kinds of transplants, because it then obviates the need to think about, well, what happens to the donor of the body? Now, I wanted to ask Jason Geringer if he had any questions or comments.
Yeah, I'm just curious about one thing. When it comes time to revive the person, I'm wondering what really financial incentive will there be to revive that person? I mean, if I was woke up 300 years later, I might be as stupid as, a third grader compared to everybody else. Why would they really? And if it costs a lot of money to revive me, why would they even want me back? I mean, I wonder if there's, some kind of, I don't know, like, we can make them famous or something, and they come back and go on tour. I don't know. What? Any ideas on that?
Yeah. So to be fair, I think if a couple hundred years went by and people were revived, they probably would have the opportunity to go on tour. I'm sure a lot of people would like to meet them. I mean, if you could meet people from the 1800s right now, I think that would be awesome, right? Just to get their perspective on life and all that. I think it would be really, really cool. And, but no, I mean, it's a good point. So I think, Alcor in specific and these other organizations, what they do is they take that life insurance money and they try to invest it safely. And then the goal is when the time comes for that revival technology, when it's available, they will already have the money that you gave them to already pay for that procedure. Now that's difficult to, we don't know how much that procedure is going to cost, right? We have no idea. So it's kind of a difficult thing to prepare for. I think there's a few things that are, really beneficial about this. I think number one is there's always crazy scientists working on things. And if there were people who were preserved back in the 1800s, like I said, and we had a chance to revive them, there would be teams working on it just because the passion of science, and they would like to do that, right? Aside from that, another point is that these people who are cryopreserved today, who are essentially going to need a very mature, molecular nanotechnology or some other kind of cell repair technology, that technology is going to be developed regardless of cryonics, right? We're going to get a control over cell damage, over cell repair, just because those are the next steps in medicine, right? Eventually, like that's where we are going to get to. That's where we need to get to help people live longer and not die. So none of this is really going to have to be developed specifically for cryonics. So it's not like there's going to need to be an overwhelming amount of money put into cryonics just for the, a couple thousand weird people who were preserved years ago, right? Hopefully, cryonics gets more popular and it's much more than that. But I think it's not necessarily, we won't need so much money dedicated specifically for this. So I think it's going to happen in time, no matter what, basically, as long as humanity survives. That's really all you're betting on. So.
Yes, indeed. And if humanity doesn't survive, then we have a host of other problems to contend with, which are much greater in magnitude. But for that discussion, see our recent virtual Enlightenment Salon on 2022, the year of the Great Filter. Our viewer Wobble writes that people in the past still had plenty of intelligence, just less knowledge. So I think by that statement, it is meant that they would be able to adapt to the world of the future. They would be able to function well in it once they learn a bit more about that world. What are the technological capabilities, what societal transformations took part, get caught up on the history from the time of their cryopreservation to the time of their revival, and then they could be integrated into that future society. American Road Warrior recommends a movie that's related to the subject from 1989 called Millennium. And the premise of that movie is that humans were snatched from a jet airliner that was about to crash. And this is a time machine movie where they are reinstantiated in a future time. So definitely an interesting recommendation. Thank you to American Road Warrior. Now I would like to go to David Shoemaker again, since David, you pointed out you had some other questions for Kai, so please proceed.
Thank you very much, now that I got off mute. So earlier in the discussion, we talked about longevity escape velocity, and I don't disagree with you a lot in that area. And I'm a bit older than you, so at least for my age group, I think I definitely agree. And I think we agree on the same problem, is that we're plodding along. We're not developing these technologies and enthusiasm, both in an exponential fashion. It's much more of a linear fashion. We get a little further, perhaps, down the road each day. Now, I come from a tech background like you, and I'm used to seeing and participating in exponential technologies. Ray Kurzweil calls that the law of accelerating returns. And that's based on the premise that you develop a technology, and then that technology can be used to develop another technology and another, or they just keep coming faster. So I'm wondering what it takes to move cryonics from a linear to an exponential plan. And one of my thoughts has to do with what I've been reading about digital twins and doing experimentations in silicon. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I mean, the good news is that, cryonics isn't really that difficult of a problem, right? I mean, when you look at what humanity is really expecting over the next couple of decades, I mean, a lot of people are expecting AGI, right? A lot of people are expecting us to colonize Mars, right? And like I mentioned earlier, like just cryopreserving and recovering slightly more complex and larger organs than we have in the past isn't like a massively tall order, right? And really the brain is all that matters. Of course, we can fiddle with the body for a long time and get that preservation better for the whole body. But once we can preserve the brain, I mean, we've solved the death problem, right? As long as you can get a quality preservation. So yeah, I mean, I think, that's one of the problems with the longevity field as well. Like, I do think, yeah, things are going to exponentially pick up momentum but I think the only things that are going to become exponential in their momentum are things that have enough focus on them. And the longevity field just doesn't right now, right? So you're betting on what people are going to care about. And people are historically like pretty stupid. So it's like kind of difficult to bet on all of humanity deciding that death is bad when it's probably going to be a long time before that change happens, right? Because there's really two routes we can take with cryonics, right? We can, and the problem is if you end up somewhere in the middle of these two routes, you end up appealing to nobody, right? So it's almost like you kind of have to take one really strong route one way or the other. We can almost make cryonics kind of this almost religion where it's we're about immortality, and it's almost has this like cult-like kind of following and feel to it, and it's almost, it almost has faith, right? It's almost a level of faith that's required. Or we can basically just say, hey, this is a medical procedure. This has nothing to do with, radical life extension. It's just like, we want to stop people from dying because generally living longer is a good thing, right? And then we don't need some huge revolution behind it, right? We just need to get the science a little bit further, and then we need to get it into hospitals, and that's it, right? Because then people start learning it in school, right? Doctors start training in it. And then if you were someone who was going to get a surgery done, right? Let's say you needed to get a surgery and it's slightly more risky. You would go to the hospital that has the cryopreservation procedures in place, because why the hell would you risk permanent death when you don't have to, right? So I think there's going to be, if I had to think about the sort of hockey stick moment in cryonics where that exponential growth happens, I think that's it. I think it's when people will no longer go to hospitals that don't have these procedures, because you're essentially risking permanent death when we don't have to anymore, right? So I think the key to getting that popularity spike is through getting it into hospitals. I think that's incredibly important. I think the more cult-like following sort of route that we've taken over the last 50 years just hasn't worked, right? And I don't think it's really necessary. We don't need that kind of following. I mean, you think about it, it's like, if we just make this a medical procedure, I mean, how much can you really tell me about how a root canal procedure works? I don't know. I mean, I'm not a dentist. I have no idea. Like I generally know what they're doing, but I don't know how the whole thing plays out. I don't need to know, right? Because it's a medical procedure. It's done in the hospital or it's done in the dentist office. And I know they know what they're doing because they're doctors, right? So it's okay. I think the same thing really has to happen here. Like, we're trying to preach people about a very, very complicated medical procedure that they just don't need to, like we don't need to explain that to people. I think it's not really selling it. I don't think that's really helping it move the industry forward. I think as long as we get this into the right area, into hospitals, and just make it a medical procedure, then people will come in by the thousands, because it's a standard method, right? I think that's the important path, or at least that's the path that I'm going to try. And we'll see how it goes. So
I think that's brilliant. Just saying.
Yes, thank you, Kai, and thank you, David, for the question, and Jason for your observation. I also wanted to recognize the generous super chat from our friend John H. He also notes that it would go a long way toward dealing with the problem of rejection if you're using a clone to receive the transplanted brain. This goes back to our discussion of creating a full body clone of oneself. So now we have about 7 minutes remaining in our salon today. So I want to ask if anybody has any final questions or comments for Kai. Charlie, please go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Kai. One question. I know that part of the issues when I've tried to convince people about cryonics is the cost, and it's pretty high at Alcor. It's more reasonable at CI. But have you considered any price point for pets, or are insurance policies even something that's doable for pets, or what's your take on that?
Yeah, so I think whole body. I think Alcor offers it for like $200,000, right?
Yeah.
For Obviously, we don't have this completely nailed down to the exact dollar. For a cat, it might be around 10,000 to start. It would be more of a premium cost just because we're not at scale yet, right?
Right.
As an organization that can scale through animal hospitals, because I mean the end goal here is that anyone can go to an animal hospital local to them and get this procedure done, right? That would be that's the whole goal with hospitals, right? So we don't have basically because we can scale. I mean, even cryonics for humans, right? You can get that $200,000 price point probably down to the low thousands. I would say under $10,000 in the future for this procedure. At scale. So pets are going to be even more cheap. Probably in the future, if we're doing this at scale, we could get in the very, very low thousands, maybe even just a couple hundreds for smaller pets. I think as of right now, pet insurance isn't going to cover cryopreservation. It's something that we'd obviously like to look into and see if we can get any partnerships there in the future. But it's going to start a little more premium, and then as we scale, it'll just get cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. It already starts out fairly cheap just because you can get dewars off the shelf. You don't have to get custom-made giant dewars for humans. We'll see. It'll be a constant focus to get the price down over time.
Excellent. Thank you for that response, Kai, and definitely a number in the low thousands or high hundreds of dollars for pet cryopreservation would be quite affordable for many people. Now let us go to Jose Cordero. He has a final message.
Yeah, well, congratulations once again. Hope that you come to Madrid to our Cryonics conference. And one quick question that I haven't heard about, even though I missed a little bit. How about neuro preservations? I mean, having just the brain or the head of the cat or the dog. Did you talk about that?
Yeah, so this one's tough. It can be a more affordable option, which is cool. I have no interest in doing neuro, honestly. I think for the most part, even though it's a more affordable option, I think it probably does more damage to the field than it does good. It's kind of scary to people, and especially when it comes to their pets. I don't think anyone wants to, get their pet's head cut off, and then what do you tell them in the future? We get their pet a whole new body, and we have to do like a brain transplant or upload their pet to Alcor land, right? Like this isn't. I don't think it's the way to really go forward and do this. I think it's a little too morbid. And if this was in the past where having neuro only could get us a better preservation of the brain, then maybe it's something that would be worth doing. But now with the current procedures, you can get just as good as preservation of the brain by sticking with the whole body. So I do think we're going to stick with whole body only because I think it's just going to be a lot more well received by pet owners who really care about their pets. I wouldn't want my cat's head to get cut off. So I think we're gonna avoid that. But
yes, thank you, Kai, and I agree with you on this. I am myself an advocate of whole body preservation as a preferred approach because there may be aspects of consciousness or even personality which reside in the nervous system outside of the brain, and by just preserving the brain, one would miss those aspects. Now we have a brief announcement from our Director of Longevity Outreach, Ben Ballweg. Ben, please proceed.
Hey, I've gotten a list together since starting a year ago almost of all the different things that I wish I had more time to do and that I could get help doing. And I am looking for people that would be interested in helping on this list. If you could email me at B as in boy, D as in dog, ballwig@gmail.com if you're interested. Or if you have an idea yourself and you would like some help with talking through it and stuff, I'd love to help in that kind of way too. There's just plenty of work out here. Gennady just emailed this morning a list of tasks that he's been wanting to get to us officers. So maybe he'd be willing to receive help as well from membership viewers, etc. Thank you. I've really enjoyed today's salon.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Ben, and your efforts in organizing volunteer initiatives on behalf of longevity outreach are greatly appreciated. This is how we hopefully will be able to change the culture, get more people inspired and enthusiastic for removing the roadblocks to achieving longevity escape velocity in our lifetimes. So if you're interested, please contact Ben at the email address provided here. And now we have come to the end of our discussion today. Thank you very much, Kai, for joining us, explaining to us your plans for Cryopets. We wish you all the best in terms of the success of this enterprise. All pet owners in the United States and eventually in the world would benefit from that. Certainly, pets do not live nearly long enough, and we want to give them another chance at life. And this will be a valuable proof of concept for the efficacy of eventual human cryopreservation and revival as well. So thank you very much to our panelists. Thank you very much to our audience. And I hope that you all live long and prosper.